Hello, welcome to the 17 March 2021 meeting of the Data Science Colloquium at Case Western Reserve University. Our speakers today are Thiago Torrent, Marcello Viridiano, and Federico Belcavallo, who will be talking about fine-grained semantic representation for multimodal data analysis. Please help me welcome our speakers.
So thank you, Mark, for having us in this data science colloquium. And today I'll be speaking on my behalf and my two colleagues, Frederico and Marcelo, on recent work we have been developing at the FrameNet Brasil Computational Linguistics Lab at the Federal University of Juiz de Fora. It's a pleasure to be here together with all of you, and I hope you like this presentation and have lots of questions in the end. So basically, today I'll be talking a little bit about frame semantics, which is the theoretical foundation upon which we build everything in our lab. Also, I will be giving you some snapshot about FrameNet, which is a computational implementation of such a theory, and of qualia structure as proposed by James Pustejovsky and then incorporated to our FrameNet database. But I'm going to do this having multimodal data analysis in focus. So in this talk, I plan to combine the theory of frame semantics, how it is implemented in FrameNet, how FrameNet Brasil is enriched with qualia relations, and how this can be applied to analyzing combination of language and either static images such as pictures or videos, for example, okay? So starting with frame semantics, I'm taking some quotes from the paper, the 1982 paper by Chuck Fillmore called Frame Semantics, in which he presents the theory. And the first sentence in this paper reads, with the term frame semantics, I have in mind a research program in empirical semantics and a descriptive framework for presenting the results of such research. So this text is considered to be as the foundational text of frame semantics precisely because of this sentence, in which the main purpose of the paper is set so as to define this new program in empirical semantics. But this whole definition is contingent upon the definition of frame, right? And then just a couple sentences further, Chuck wrote, by the term frame, I have in mind any system of concepts related in such a way that to understand any one of them, you have to understand the whole structure in which it fits, right? So instead of trying to explain this definition with more theory, I'm going to provide you with an example using this picture of Kaminarimon Temple in Japan, right? So while looking at this picture, we can identify that this is a place, right? So there are elements in the image showing me that it's somehow urban location because there are buildings in the background, right? That there seems to be an attraction. And the reason why I think this is an attraction first is because it clearly stands out in the picture in relation to the rest. And second, because of all those people, right? Which I'm assuming to be tourists. And the reason why I think they are tourists, well, they have cameras, they are pointing their cameras to places. And to some extent, they have this, you know, relaxed setback aspect of someone who is not going to work, right? If it was, for example, a picture of another location in Tokyo, such as the Shibuya Crossroad, for example, right? With all people wearing suits and carrying briefcases and crossing the pedestrian crossing lanes, then maybe I wouldn't think of that as tourists and attraction, okay? So if you think of it as a system of concepts and as a place and an attraction and a tourist, each of those are separate concepts. This is a frame, right? And it's quite interesting because if you think in terms of image description, this is also a frame, right? This is a, so there is this overlap of concepts and this coincidence throughout this talk. But here we could add a bit more of complexity, because I could look at this picture at this event that is immortalized in this picture from the perspective of the tourist, or conversely, I could look at it from the perspective of the attraction. And if I change the perspective, I'm also changing the frame. This is another fundamental aspect of frame semantics, right? So for example, if I'm adopting the perspective of the tourist, I'm looking at some frame which can be defined as the Turing frame, in which one of those concepts, the tourist, experiences a specific attraction, a specific place with a unique history, or other socially recognized individual character with the goal of seeing and learning about it. And the thing is that this frame manifests in language, so it can be evoked in the mind of the comprehender when this comprehender listens or reads words such as do, see, or tour, right? So I can say, oh, I visited Tokyo. And the people say, oh, what did you do? Oh, we did Kaminarimon and the Tokyo Tower and Shibuya and this and that, right? Or I saw those places. Or you can use the noun with a support verb like I took a 24-hour tour of Tokyo and was able only to see the top 5 highlights. Okay? But on the other side, if I'm looking at the perspective of attraction, then it's not touring anymore. It's more like attracting tourists. And then the frame definition becomes either a place or an attraction has culturally and or historically recognized natural or artificial resources which attract tourists from different places. And then the way this perspective manifests in language is different. So I can use the word attraction or the verbs draw or lure and say, for example, that Kaminarimon lures tourists who wants to experience the traditional side of Tokyo. Okay? So basically, this idea, this basic idea of frame semantics, which can be summarized in one of the most famous of Chuck Fillmore's quotes, is that meanings are relativized to scenes. So for someone to understand the meaning of a lexical item or of a sentence, this person needs to relativize the definition of this word or this verb or construction to a scene, to a system of concepts that are somehow related, that even if the sentence does not mention one of those elements, it is brought to mind. So if you take, for example, since we're talking about tourism, a travel guide, and you read, visit Kaminarimon no matter how much time you have in Tokyo. You're not explicitly mentioning the tourist because you're using an imperative form, but you know that the agent will be the tourist, right? Because this concept is brought to mind. So this theory has been implemented as first a lexical resource and then a constructional resource called FrameNet. So it started as a computational lexicography project in 1997, led by Chuck Fillmore at ICSI, the International Computer Science Institute in Berkeley. And it models a network of frames, right, to serve as a model of linguistic cognition, accounting for the meaning of lexical units and later on other linguistic structures such as constructions, syntax. And it then annotates corpus to attest the proposed analysis, right? So if you return to the definition of the Turing frame, it was taken from the FrameNet database, right? And you see that on top of the definition of the frame, we also define the elements, and we use those elements as labels for annotating corpora, which instantiate the frame that we have modeled. And I tend to repeat that very often. It's a FrameNet, it's not a frame list. So although when you log into any of the FrameNet all over the world, all the websites, and you click to see the frames, you see a list of frames alphabetically ordered, but this is not the best visualization option that you have. So when you go to the frame grapher, you can actually see how those frames are related. So here you have a glimpse, a part of the frames that FrameNet Brasil defined for modeling the tourism domain and how it surfaces in language. And you can see Turing here at the bottom center part of the slide. And you can see that this pink arrow shows us that this is one of the perspectives of the concept of attraction tourism, which has the other perspective, which is the perspective of the attraction, which is attracting tourists. And then another perspective we named as tourist potential, in which the perspective is that of the place. So you say, for example, that Tokyo offers several attractions to its visitors, right? Well, when we model a frame, because it's originally a lexicography project, we query corpora for instances of the lexical units evoking the frame. So here I'm taking two of the lexical units of the Turing Frame in English, do and tour, and then we annotate. So for example, if you take a sentence like, back in 2018, we did the historical cities of Minas Gerais, then we is the tourists, the historical cities is the attractions, and of Minas Gerais is the place where those attractions are located. And with tour, you have the place in Rio, then the tourists, most foreigners do the Corcovado tour, and then the Corcovado is the attraction where the Christ the Redeemer statue is, and do is a support verb, right? So FrameNet annotation does not only annotate example sentences for the lexical units that we define, we also annotate full texts. So instead of creating a frame, defining a lexical unit, and then going to a corpus tool to extract instances of that lexical unit, we also take full texts and try to assign lexical units to all of them, right? So here there is a sentence in Portuguese. The reason why it's here is because I'm going to refer back to it when I show you the multimodal annotation. But the translation of this sentence is almost literal into English, right? And it would be translated as something like, when we think of Scotland, the first things that come to mind are many skirts, Scotch whiskey, and bagpipe. And what you see here, things like temporal collocation, cogitation are the frames that are evoked by the lexical items to their left. So when evokes temporal collocation, think evokes cogitation, first ordinal numbers, things evokes entity, and so on and so forth, right? So if we look at a frame such as cogitation, we have the definition. So a person, the cognizer, thinks about a topic over a period of time. So when we think of Scotland, we is the cognizer, Scotland is the topic. Those are the core frame elements, so are the ones that must be present for the frame to instantiate. And there are some non-core frame elements that are optional. We can annotate them to show the circumstances in which this frame evocation takes place. So here is one sample screen of our annotation tool. So basically, the sentence is split into characters. And what we do is that we click a string of characters and add a label to it. So you already recognize the label of the cognizer and the topic because you just saw it. But notice that there are additional labels. There is one for the grammatical functions. So here the cognizer is the external argument, like the subject, and the topic, like when we think of Scotland, is a dependent, and then the phrase type. So here you have a noun phrase, here you have a prepositional phrase. And we can do this annotation for whiskey and for Scotch and so on and so forth. And what you have here are the frames evoked by each of those lexical units. So pensar in Portuguese is think, evokes cogitation, whiskey evokes food and beverage, and Scotch evokes origin, right? The issue is that sometimes, I don't know how familiar you are with FrameNet, some people, especially doing data analysis, data science, will tell you that FrameNet has a problem which is it's too fine-grained. Like it's too specific, right? So people, for example, working with AMR, abstract meaning representation, they use this example. So AMR has one sense, abstract meaning for break, while FrameNet has at least 4. Because break can evoke a frame such as cause to fragment, like I broke her favorite vase in revenge. It can evoke an inchoative breaking, like the vase broke. It can evoke body damage, like I broke my arm, right? And or it can evoke record breaking, so she broke the record. Okay, but I can tell you that there is also the opposite problem. Sometimes FrameNet is too coarse-grained, because since the frames are not the meaning of the words, they are the scene against which this meaning is to be comprehended. Things like basil, barbecue, beef, beer, Berliner, berry, and beverage, they all mean very different things, but they are all food or beverage. So they evoke the same frame, right? So sometimes the problem with FrameNet is that the frame representation, because it lumps together a bunch of lexical units with very different meaning, individual meaning, it can be too coarse-grained for some applications, okay? This is the reason why in FrameNet Brazil, we have always questioned ourselves because of the kind of applications that we built, how to improve the granularity of the FrameNet model. And one thing that we've done was to map frame elements to the frames that are evoked by those words that usually fill the role of that frame element in a frame. So if you take the attracting tourist frames, in which an attraction draws the attention of tourists, what we did was to say that this attraction is usually a building, such as a museum or a university or a temple, or it can be a locale by use, such as a park, for example, a running track, or it can be a natural feature, such as a beach, a mountain, a lake, river, whatever. And those are all frames in FrameNet. While the tourist is usually some person that is being perspectivized under the leisure activity this person is engaged in, right? So the people by leisure activity usually fills this slot. So by doing that, we already augmented the density of the FrameNet Brasil database in comparison to the other FrameNets that don't do it. But we still didn't have a means of making important connections. So for example, both pizza and beer are in the food and beverage frame. But one would expect that pizza is more closely related to a cook or to a pizza place than beer is, right? So to be able to make those connections explicit, we turned to Pustejovsky-Qualia relations. And this idea was changed a little bit in FrameNet Brazil. So another quote, this time by Pustejovsky and Jacek, saying that qualia indicate a single aspect of a word's meaning, defined on the basis of the relation between the concept expressed by the word and another concept that the word evokes, right? So the generative lexicon theory proposed by James Pustejovsky originally proposed 4 qualia roles, the formal, the constitutive, the telic, and the agentive. And if we take pizza as an example, and just list the qualia, the original proposed qualia, you would have something like, the formal quale for pizza is food, because pizza is a type of food. The telic one is eat, because it's meant to be eaten. The constitutive could be flour, because the ingredients are constitutive of the pizza. And the agentive, which is the quale that indicates the conditions under which that word was brought about or came to existence, we would have things like the cook or the pizza restaurant who made the pizza, okay? So the problem, again, is that a quail may be very coarse-grained, right? And people doing GL, generative lexicon, have realized that, and they came up with a bunch of ontologies to create subtypes of each quail. So you have the two most famous are the simple ontology and the Brandeis ontology. So at first, we considered looking at those ontologies, but well, ontologies are a problem, right? And the problem lies precisely in the fact that they lack context. And just to give an example, so we could all agree that ingredients are constitutive of pizza because they are a part of a pizza. So the flour, the tomato sauce, the cheese, right? But is price constitutive of pizza? And the answer is, it depends. Are you buying the pizza? Are you selling the pizza? Then the answer is yes, price is constitutive of the pizza. Or is it your Italian grandma's pizza that you'd say is priceless? Then no, price is not constitutive of pizza. But maybe love is, care is, tradition is, or something like that. So because those ontologies would fall short in capturing how this meaning is construed and how it's grounded in culture, what we did in FrameNet was to use frames to mediate those qualia relations, right? So for example, for the case of pizza, FrameNet has a cooking creation frame in which a cook prepares a produced food. And what we did was taking a quail to be a relation between two words. We just say that one of those words is an instance of the frame element cook, or could be an instance of a frame element cook. And the second one could be an instance of produced food. And then we create a subtype, for example, of the agentive relation, connecting a cook to the kind of food this cook typically prepares using a frame-mediated qualia relation. So we revamped the original qualia defined for pizza in generative lexicon theory, and then the frame cooking creation mediates the agentive relation between cook or pizza restaurant and pizza, right? The frame ingredients mediates the constitutive relation between flour and pizza. The frame exemplar mediates the formal relation between pizza and food, and the frame tool purpose mediates the telic relation between pizza and eat. Okay, I know it's odd to call a pizza a tool, but basically the definition of tool in tool purpose is everything that is human made, because FrameNet has two entity purpose frames, one for things that are made by the humanity and the other one by natural things. You know, like, so an apple is meant to be eaten, but apple is not a tool. It would be the inherent purpose frame. And here's a short list of some of those relations that we created, right? So we created an agentive relation using the causation frame, saying that an effect is caused by a cause. We created a constitutive frame using the people by religion frame, saying that a person is a follower of a religion, and so on and so forth, right? There is a quite extensive list of those types. And we've been using those types to make the FrameNet Brasil database richer than the original FrameNet database. But why have we been doing it? Basically, to build a set of tools, so to build a machine translation post-editing system, to build a tourist attraction recommendation system for Rio and Juiz de Fora, but, and this is the focus of this talk, to apply it to multimodal analysis. So I'll be showcasing, giving you a glimpse of two of those projects. One, which is the PhD dissertation project by Marcelo Viridiano, who is here, and the other one which is also the PhD dissertation project by Fred Belcavello, who is also here. So both projects share the same hypothesis, right? So our motivation to combine multimodality with frame semantics relies on this hypothesis, which is similar to words in a sentence, which evoke frames. Information from other modalities, such as images or video, may play a role in frame evocation, right? So we are taking FrameNet, the FrameNet model, to the multimodal setting. The first of these applications I'll be showing you is on multimodal machine translation. So basically, multimodal machine translation has been growing in interest as a means to solve either polysemy or homonym, right? So this is one of the parade examples, which is he took the airplane. And then took can be take as removing a theme from a source, or it can be take in the sense of boarding, right? One of the other parade examples in the papers is bank, like the bank where you put your money in, or the river bank, okay? And sometimes when you have a sentence like, I saw her passing by the bank or walking by the bank, you don't know if it's the financial institution or the natural feature, the river bank, right? And basically, the idea is that we could maybe combine the semantic information that images can give us with the network of semantic relations from FrameNet to help solve this ambiguity problem in translations and improve machine translation algorithms. So Marcelo's research question is basically, how can we bring fine-grained semantics into multimodal machine translation? And then first, what we've been doing is to use manually annotated images that come from a data set called Flickr 30K entities to gather metadata in multilingual data sets containing image-text pairings. And we start with English, right? So basically, what's the idea of Flickr 30K entities? I don't know if you are all familiar with the Flickr 30K corpus. Basically, it's 30,000 pictures from Flickr, which do not contain any celebrity. So there is no picture with the Pope or Bill Clinton or whoever, right? Who is recognizable as famous. And then annotators were asked at this first stage in the Flickr 30K original corpus to provide 5 captions in English for each image. So 5 different annotators, each of them writes a caption, right? And then people in the Flickr 30K entities annotated Flickr 30K corpus with bounding boxes, which indicate the entities that are mentioned in the captions, and then correlated those bounding boxes with the entities. Okay, so this is actually one of the images in Flickr 30K. There is a figure ice skater, and then this guy, which is some kind of tech or referee skating in the background, right? And then you see some bounding boxes here. So the green bounding box is drawn around the ice rink. And the 2 red ones are around the people here. And then you have this purple one because one of the captions mentions the outfit of the figure skater. And the other one mentions her leg. And the other one mentions the blade, which is in green here. Right? And basically what we do then is that we take those sentences, which already have all the correlations with the bounding boxes, and we run them through DAISY, which is a semantic parser that we developed locally. And this parser analyzes the image captions and check which objects in the images match lexical units in English, right? So one of the captions is, a woman figure skater in a blue costume holds her leg in the air by the blade of her skate. Right? So when we run this caption through DAISY, DAISY is, by the way, an acronym, is disambiguation algorithm for inferring the semantics of Y. And it's Y because it depends on the semantics of what comes before, which is X in this network. So we already know that woman in this caption was matched to the bounding box 2780895, the red one, right? And we know that woman evokes the people frame in FrameNet, right? So we add another layer of metadata to the already very rich Flickr 30K entities corpus. And the same goes for skater, which is athletes by sport, and blue, which evokes color, and costume, which evokes clothing, and leg, which evokes body parts, and skate, which evokes sports equipment. Okay? So the thing is that we've been expanding this data set into Brazilian Portuguese, adding Brazilian Portuguese to the Modi 30K corpus, which creates 10 additional captions in each language, 5 of which are originally produced in the new language, such as Brazilian Portuguese, and 5 of which are translations of the English original. And we also run those captions through the same tool because FrameNet Brasil has data in Portuguese and English. And then we use this resulting data set to train a frame-based machine translation algorithm, which in the lack of a given word in a sentence can find the correlations brought about by the bounding boxes in the image, right? So we are now augmenting the training corpus, and then we will go into the implementation phase. The second project deals with the semantic annotation of audiovisual data. And basically, the research question is, how can we build a frame-based model to address the coalescence of image and audio in the process of meaning construction when you are watching, for example, a TV program, right? And or in other words, how can we track synchronies and asynchronies in this process? Because except for those cases in which, for example, you have a fixed camera on top of a cooking table, and there is someone, for example, chopping a tomato, and then you read the part of the recipe, chop the tomatoes, right? Usually the correlation between what is in the text or in the audio and what you are seeing is not that direct, not even in the news, right? So there is some partial overlap. So this is what Fred's project investigates. So for this project, first we developed a multimodal corpus import pipeline because we need to bring this corpus inside the FrameNet Brasil web annotation tool. And basically what we do is we take either a video which is in the cloud, such as in YouTube or something like that, or a video which is locally in a computer, and we import it to the FrameNet WebTool. So this is like the interface we've been developing. This is a Google Summer of Code project from past year, which is under integration to our main pipeline. And then the person will select the language of the video, the corpus to which it will be added, the document, and then click upload files. And this person will then have the opportunity to review this corpus. But why is this necessary? Because what this pipeline does is first to break the video into 30 frames of images, static images per second, and get what is being said during this process. So the speech is converted into an MPEG file submitted to a speech-to-text tool, cloud service. And then this speech-to-text tool generates a text file in which the lines of text are time-stamped according to their presence in the video. So for example, this is the travel show we've been analyzing. So sometimes the host, when he's speaking and talking to the camera, he uses Brazilian Portuguese. This is, for example, a show shown in Brazil. But sometimes he interviews people. And then when he interviews people, he usually talks in English. And then Brazilian Portuguese subtitles are added, right? But if you imagine that this TV show is aired in Brazil, where more than 80% of the population does not speak other language than Brazilian Portuguese, right? We assume that those viewers would rely mostly in the captions. So we take the subtitles from the images, convert into a text file, which is also timestamp, and then merge them in one single text for annotation. And that's what the annotator first reviews. So he can play, the movie and check if the subtitle is okay. So speech recognition is not great for Brazilian Portuguese. So a lot of corrections must be made here. Then those images generate the video frames. Some of the visual elements may not show up in the text directly. Again, this is not a cooking recipe, okay? So we apply a machine vision algorithm, currently it's YOLO, which recognizes elements in this video and adds those elements to a JSON file, also with the timestamps, together with the text, also with the timestamps, right? So for example, what the host is saying is became a part of their tradition in the city. And this is said in a range of 2 seconds. And during those 2 seconds, though, this image is shown, but note that there is no direct reference to a hat, to a country musician, and to his bass. Okay? So the result of this multimodal corpus import pipeline is a JSON file with the transcription of all audio plus timestamps, the transcription of all subtitles plus timestamps, the coordinates of all detected objects and their frame ID in the video, and the classes of all detected objects and their frame IDs. And we use this to develop an annotation task in which our purpose is to assign the FrameNet labels to this multimodal corpus, right? So basically, sorry, I missed a slide. We've been using this travel show as a reference. Is Pedro pelo Mundo, is a TV travel series, usually regarded as a good example of audiovisual composition. The first season has 10 episodes of 23 minutes, 200 sentences per episode on average, 2,000 sentences in total, and on average we expect something between 12,000 annotation sets for the text, right? So there are details on that. Basically, this is multimodal piece in which language is dominant. So it's not visually dominant, it's more textual dominant. So we first annotate the audio transcript using the FrameNet Brasil annotation tool. Then we annotate the frames evoked by the visual objects, which are related to the auditory guidance, so which are related to the text. And then we analyzed if the annotations of language and video are synchronous or asynchronous for the frames evoked. So again, the sentence that I gave you in the first part of the talk, when we think of Scotland, the first thing that comes to mind is miniskirt, Scottish whiskey, and bagpipe. So while this sentence is being said, those are the main video frames that people see. Okay? So you see that there are some correlations, such as the whiskey and the miniskirt and the bagpipe, right? And then we annotate the sentence using the tool for the frames. And then we assign frames to the bounding boxes that were recognized. So here, bounding box 5 is assigned to the clothing frame, and it's the clothes. 6 is to the noisemakers frame, and this is the noisemaker. I know that it can be offensive to Scottish people, call a bagpipe noisemaker, but That's the frame we have. And this is the guy, which is referred to in the text as a man in skirt. But the annotator annotated this person as an instance of the people by origin frame, because he looked at it and saw, oh, this is a Scottish person, right? This is a Scot, okay? And then we contrast the frames evoked in the audio, and they're listed here with their timestamps, and the ones evoked in the video, right? So we have this list of frames for audio and 4 frames for the video, right? And all frames evoked by the video modality coexist with some frame evoked during the time where the audio is being set, but not necessarily it's the same frame. There are some cases in which you have synchrony, which are the food frame evoked for whiskey and the noisemakers for bagpipe. But note that the people and people by origin and the clothing frames are evoked asynchronously, right? And more than that, as I showed you, in the audio, the frame evokes people because it's man in skirt, then man evokes people. But the annotator chose people by origin for the video. And that could be a problem because we know that man in skirt refers to the Scottish guy. This is quite obvious. Anyone would understand that, right? But how can this happen? And most important, how this kind of semantic representation can deal with that, right? So those 2 questions are actually now the main point of investigation of the project. And the idea is that if we bring the kind of ternary query relations that I showed you before into play, we could actually solve this issue, because man in skirt, right? We know that man evokes the people frame, but then skirt evokes the clothing frame, okay? And kilt, which is actually the kind of skirt actually mentioned or showed in the image, would be in a formal relation with skirt, mediated by the type frame. So skirt is a category and the kilt is a subtype of skirt. Kilt is also related to Escocese, like Scottish, which evokes the people by origin frame, in a ternary query relation mediated by the idiosyncrasy frame, because you would say that a kilt is an idiosyncrasy that is constitutive of an entity which is a Scottish person. And if you take those query relations into consideration, then you would find a connection in the network of frames and lexical units that would say, okay, those 2 frames in the audio and in the video are connected, although they are not mentioned in synchrony, and although they are not evoked by the same kind of modality, and they are not the same frames. But even though you would find some sort of correlation that could show that this kind of FrameNet model is suitable for this kind of analysis. So this is it. Thank you so much. And we hope you enjoyed and are looking forward to your questions. And here are some of the credits for the icons that we used. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, all 3 of you, for the work and for the presentation. If anybody has, we have all of these clapping emoji in the participant list. By the way, Alex Bergs gave a wonderful hour-long analysis of the goodbye meme in Zoom. How how we do things we would never do in reality, but we feel we must do them when we're in Zoom. If anybody has a question, just raise your hand or put it in the chat or draw attention to yourself. We're such a diplomatic, self-organizing group. While you're thinking, let me start. So I'm excited about your work, as you know, for so many reasons. One of them has to do with the opportunity it might present for transforming pedagogy and learning. That is, when I was a kid in San Diego, half of my friends easily had Mexican backgrounds. They were all in parochial school, Catholic churches. So the way I learned about this culture, and indeed Spanish, was by just-in-time delivery. That is, I was embedded in it immersively. It was when I didn't know something, there it was. An expert was busy telling me. Okay, but in the academy, when we learn things, typically these get separated. So an example would be Christian iconography. So I knew something about Christian iconography because of my friends in San Diego. And then I started traveling Europe at age 16 with Michelin green guides and studying in front of the picture what's going on. And then I read this multi-volume work by Emil Mahl. It's fabulous, just fabulous. So Red Hen would like to create a system for Christian iconography called Emil Mahl, and we have a number of proposals for it, Google Summer of Code, where you just point your smartphone at this thing you find in Pitigliano, Italy, and it's a painting or a representation or a church or something. You have no idea what's going on. And Emil Mahl proposes to you, oh, I think this is this saint, and click here. And in other words, just-in-time delivery, because there is structured knowledge that other people have built into frames and packets in such a way that multimodally they could be applied. Not perfectly, it's not going to be the same as Emil Mahl, but this could, if we had archaeologists creating the frames that you need to understand, I don't know, Scottish or Anglo-Saxon archaeology, if we had anthropologists creating this and that and the other, and then could apply them, we could try to move pedagogy more, and multimodally so, more in the direction of just-in-time delivery, where, I mean, it would be great if you just always had those experts right there with you to interpret everything, but mostly you don't, right? And you are in the lead of doing this kind of thing. Now, the question I have to ask you is unfair, because it's like, hey, the group has done a fabulous thing, and now you want them to do even more, right? Okay, but you know that I work on, and Google Summer of Code works on, when you have multiple frames. Now, sometimes you have multiple frames and they just go together in a standard way. So if you're looking at Olympic skiing, you probably have to have a frame for winter and outdoors. You need a frame for sport. You need a frame for competition. You probably need a frame for skiing and spectator sport and all that, but they're going together in standard ways. You have to call them up, they go together in standard ways. Then there are frame blends, where the two frames are brought together, and what you're emphasizing, they don't usually go together, or there's something unusual about putting them together, but they go together with wonderful coherence. But now here's the third one, and that is when multiple frames have to be used, but the clash between them, the semantic leap, is foregrounded. So I thought of you as I was watching Coming to America 2 with Eddie Murphy, which has Wesley Snipes as playing the character of the military dictator of the African country next door, which is called Nextoria. And I hadn't realized that Wesley Snipes, the great actor of Blade, the Blade trilogy, was a comic genius. Absolutely hilarious. And he has all these costumes, right? Also excellent. And in one of them, he's in full Highland garb. He is rocking a kilt. Now, so this calls up, Scotland and full Highland, but at the same time, it's manifest to you that he is not Scottish. He is speaking English, but he is doing it with an accent that's maximally not Scottish and on a absolutely hilarious. So in and the whole movie depends on that. I think we've got Amy Cook in here, who has an entire book on that talks about the clash or the relationship between the actor and the character played. So in Coming to America 2, there are these three guys in the barber shop, and you know perfectly well this one is played by Eddie Murphy, but he's playing a character who's like at a maximum distance from Eddie Murphy, and much of the humor depends upon these kinds of things. So as you go forward and your system through all of these different avenues is able to pick out the multiple frames that are going on, do you yet see, and the answer may be, come on, Mark, give us a break, but do you yet see any patterns for indicating the type of multiple framing that we see? Is this just straight stereotypical Olympic skiing? Is this blending? Is this semantic leap, tension between the frames that you're supposed to see? Hard question, but you're the expert, so I might as well ask.
Well, great question. Actually, we had some frustrating experience like 7 years ago, while trying to use the measuring the distance in the FrameNet network for trying to predict how likely a given combination of a non-canonical spectral marker would be with a semantic type of verb. Right? So for example, in English, you could say that someone burst into tears, in which you have this spectral inceptive marker, like the beginning of an action, but you would hardly ever hear someone saying, unless intentionally, like very intentionally, someone burst into meditating. Right? Because although you have what Ed Switzer called semantic bleaching of the spectral marker, there is some sort of image schematic meaning that is retained, right? And gives you a set of possibilities of combination. And then you could bring Talmy and say that you could use like barrier breaking as an image schematic semantics for bursting into tears or something like that. My impression. And why did we fail? Because back in the day, FrameNet was very short on those frames, on image schematic frames and on metaphorical metonymic projections between frames. So when you look at this model, you would have to bring those possibilities of cognition into play, and then you have to get a bit away from the pure lexicographic initiative, which is something that we have been doing for a while now. So now we're better at that. So my impression with Christian iconography or with movie making and this kind of thing is that you could have the same kind of construction patterns for other modalities. So for example, for Christian iconography, usually you have some hotspots to look at when you see a mural or a sculpture. So is this saint stepping on something? Is this thing an animal? Or is this an object, right? Is this saint holding something? Is this saint wearing something on his head? Because, and sometimes what you actually have are very interesting frame blends. I can't remember now which church, because I saw lots of them in my first trip to Europe, and I can't have the perfect recollection now, but I remember that there was an image of Jesus Christ represented in John the Baptist's clothes or something like that, right? And this was in the audio tour.
Yeah, hair, shirt, like, all of the whole deal.
Yeah, like this
pointing
is
at the lamb, right?
Yeah, because the sculpture did this and this and this, right? So my impression is that in the same way that you have frames with elements for spectral constructions, like there is an agent or not, there is an action or a process, there is a beginning time and end time or something like that, you could have a frame for Christian iconography. in which you would have elements such as things on the head, objects being held, clothes, things being stepped on, right? Presence or absence of wounds, a bunch of different things, okay? And my take on that, Mark, is that each frame element is a potential door to those kinds of correlations, extensions, and blends, right? And of course, you know that, I learned that from you, because blending is partial. You don't need to project everything, right? You can actually find parts of the system of concepts that coalesce better, that merge better, that blend better. And my impression is that if you have annotated data for that, as you can have for anything, right? Maybe you could, with a lot of effort, train a system to recognize those points. Because, for example, returning to both the movie example and the Christian iconography, clothing is very important, and it can be recognized, right, in machine vision systems. The same goes for objects or this kind of thing. So my impression is that the road is this one. We just need to find a problem or a data set to test it.
Brilliant, Chago. Lanneker, by the way, talks about these as spectral clashes. He points out that you probably can't say, I am seeing a flash, because the flash is punctual, but the am seeing is progressive. Unless you have special circumstances, like a seer looking into a crystal ball in the future and saying, I am seeing a flash, which manages the spectral conflict. So I'll think about this. I think it's very promising. Justin Barber has a comment in the chat. Justin, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure, I can. I always talk too long in the chat anyway. Really, so Tim and Michael and I have experimented sometimes with sort of re-ambiguating translation and things like that. And I love what you're doing here with image and text. And I just wonder if there's any way to sort of at the end, maybe in the JSON or something, just to have some sort of sense of what the ambiguities really might be. You know, for us, like if we were reading ancient texts or something like that, just to sort of have a choice of different things to choose from, maybe even with probabilities assigned to each one or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's precisely what DAISY does. So it calculates and gives as an output like the most likely frame, but it keeps track of the scores of all the frames, right? So for example, if you submit a sentence to the system, it would give you, and you have a polysemous and ambiguous lexical unit, it would give you all the frames that this lexical unit might evoke and the activation potential, because it's based on a spread activation algorithm that uses each of the words as nodes irradiating energy, and then those words would activate all the frames, and then the frames are linked in FrameNet, and the closely related they are, the higher the activation node, but you still get access to the other ones.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Justin, that's right on track for ambitions, because of course, for an awful lot of stuff, the big question is interpretation, and you can interpret things differently, right? So when one archaeological school looks at, I don't know, the Sutton Hoo burial, they think you need this frame in order to understand the archaeological remains, but the other school disagrees. They think it's a different one. So all of these sort of global FrameNet ideas and the Red Hen Lab idea of a fork of FrameNet include who built that frame, or who tagged this scene with that frame. What lab do they come from? Because for an awful lot of research, what you really want to see is where the state of the art conflicts are. So you want to know which ones are used most, which ones connect to this, that, but you also sort of want to know which lab thinks you need which frames. And so that's very, very high in sort of the design priority of all systems that deal with framing for just the reasons you have described. Okay, somebody else. I see Irena has a hand up. Professor Mittelberg, can we invite you into the audio?
Thank you so much, Mark. Hello. Yeah, thank you for this inspiring work. I really am very impressed. And I just would like to share some of my experience of applying Fillmore's early understanding of frames to gesture and speech. So I've done some work on that, and also considering image schematic structure of gestures and metonymy and so forth. And so I have not come that far yet, and I have not looked into FrameNet applications to gesture, because gestures, as you know, are very fluid signs and multifunctional and polysemous. So I'm looking forward to reading some of your work to maybe see, you know, how our experiences and insights might match in terms of multimodality and correlation of, of certain aspects of frame evocation and the challenges, and also to see some mediality effects, because as I just said, I mean, gestures, as you all know, they have their own logic and mediality, and they're not very easy to for a systematic approach, or like a FrameNet approach. But what's interesting with gesture and speech is that that gesture disambiguates speech and speech disambiguates gesture. So I think there is really something of a very, very close correlation of meaning making and structure making. So yeah, so you gave me a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Actually, we do have Mark, Francis, Fred, and I a joint mentorship project for this Summer of Code, in which we aim to start investigating precisely joint meaning construal with speech and co-speech gestures. So Mark gave two interesting examples, the air quotes, and the other one is the path, right? So the first to do and then. But the air quotes, for example, are very, to me, are very interesting, because they can mean, in terms of frames, as you pointed out, a lot of very different things. And correct me, Mark, if I'm wrong, but I think that example was Ellen DeGeneres saying, I don't want to be married, I want to be married. And you have this, right?
Very close. My very close. My recollection is, yes, it's not I don't want to be married. It's okay, I'm not married, I'm just married.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've put into the chat for everybody, or I'm putting it in now, the link to this project that we all have on exactly this topic.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that if you take, I don't know, 1,000 instances of air quote use, it's not that you're going to have 1,000 different frames evoked, but you will find some variation. And this kind of variation would be contingent on the kind of frame evoked in language as well, right? So,
right. And the expert here is Peter Uhrig, who I think might actually be in the meeting if Peter wants to add anything. But it's the kind of thing that a multimodal analysis is really expert at, because you can pick out the air quotes, you can also pick out the change in the voice.
It turns out the air quotes are surprisingly hard to find, because people do an awful lot of strange things when they want to use when they speak. And this particular show that we've been using, the Ellen DeGeneres show, is very bad. because people, for instance, if you look for finger configurations, it can be something like this. This kind of finger configurations you get when people put on their glasses and take off their glasses. And even if you'd like to change the distance, I've spent days on this. And let's just say they're hard to pick out at the moment. But and you get false positives because people wave in some ways and it looks like air quotes, but it's not. So I have lots of examples if you want bad examples, things not working out correctly. And I have a collection of examples of air quotes that are air quotes for training purposes. So if you're interested, I will also put in this link to the red hen, to this, what's it called? The video that Mark just referenced with Ellen DeGeneres, Married.
Yeah.
It's, I'll put it into the chat.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. I think at this point, if anybody has a last question, raise your hand or jump in, or a comment. Peter, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, just a simple linguistic question on the modeling of the meant to. You have a relationship here, meant to, in the qualia design. And I wasn't quite sure whether that makes a distinction between the object of being meant to do, like pizza being meant to be eaten, because you have meant to and then you have eat verb, or whether that you make it basically between the agent and the patient of the verb, whether how you make that difference in that model, or is meant to only for objects or patients or whatever you call them.
So meant to connects an entity to a event, which usually translates into connecting a noun to a verb, right? And basically the idea of those is meant to or is a type of is just to have some sort of mnemonic representation of the subtype of the qualia, so that people do not have to say, this is a Tillich quail mediated by the two-purpose frame, or this is the two-purpose Tillich, or something like that, right? Actually, the relation is not necessarily is meant to. Sometimes we recognize that it's not like the best way of naming it, but the restriction applies between, because this is a Tillich relation, so usually if you take from GL, it connects an entity to an event. So it's like the entity and the purpose of this entity. Was that your question? Or?
I'm not 100% sure I'm following that now. Sorry if I'm, my question was mainly, you have somebody who say is a cook and you have food, and you can both use a meant to relation to the verb eat, but they have a different role in relation to the verb eat. One is the cook is preparing, or no, maybe not eat. That's not sense. Doesn't make sense. Sorry, the guest in the restaurant and the food. So the guest in the restaurant is meant to eat something there, and the food is the thing that is meant to be eaten. And I was just wondering whether you make a difference between these, because meant to actually looked to me like it wasn't doing that.
Yeah, no, we do have a difference, because those would be two different mediating frames, right? So the qualia relation between the guest who is going to eat is between the, for example, customer and eating, or the client of the restaurant and eating, okay? And this would be mediated by intentionally act. And then the customer would be an instance of the agent frame in intentionally act, and eating would be the action in this frame. Now,
okay, so intentionally act is basically the active, the agent relation, and meant to is the patient relation.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us in the data science colloquium. Everybody's thanking you. Now, just before I end the there's Thomas Herbst clapping. Yes, before I end the recording, this is your opportunity for the goodbye construction in Zoom. Goodbye.